Hospital porters' pride and dignity stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hapanwo TV and welcome to part 2 of this film, Real Zombies. Now, as I was explaining in part 1, I was mulling over the idea in my head that this whole affair was some kind of psyop. There was no real zombies, literally. It was some kind of psychological attack on people done by the government, which there are many, many of those which are confirmably real. It was starting to, maybe I'll talk about this later on or maybe in another movie, but there was a time when firemen in the United States were sent some instruction manuals on how to handle UFO incidents, and I thought that's a bit odd. But anyway, I was mulling these questions over in my head. But then this news story came out of Harford County in Maryland on the 25th of May 2012, and before I begin I should warn you, this is disturbing. Okay, so here it is. One moment, I'll just get it up on the screen.
And now to a shocking story out of Harford County, a case of cannibalism. Police say part of the remains discovered earlier this week were actually eaten. 11 News reporter Rob Roblin has the gruesome details. He joins us live at the Sheriff's Office in Harford County. Rob.
Well, it started out as a missing persons report, but it ended up as murder. Police here in Harford County say this is a crime of murder and cannibalism. Police say this man, 21-year-old Alexander Kenyu, not only killed his roommate with a knife, but he also ate the victim's heart and part of his brains.
Stated that he consumed Mr. Cody's internal organs, specifically his heart and portions of his brain.
Fuck me.
The suspect then led detectives to a dumpster at 536 Trimble Road in Joppa, where they recovered what remained of Mr. Cody's body.
This investigation started as a missing person report that the deceased, 37-year-old Cujo Bansafo A.G. Cody, had gone jogging and never came home. Last night, when police searched the victim and suspect's home, they found body parts of the victim.
Specifically, a human head and 2 human hands and 2 chins.
Police say at this time they have no motive.
We have a lot of follow-up to do, and some of that follow-up will be re-interviewing the suspect, and at this point I can't tell you one way or the other.
Is he saying why at all?
He is not.
And this investigation is ongoing. The suspect is in jail. He has been denied bail. Reporting live, Rob Roblin, WBAL-TV 11 News.
Right, well, you might think that's just a coincidence, a freak event. These things do happen, of course. But then, on the very same day, this happened.
Right now, new at 11 for you, new information on that horrific attack by the MacArthur Causeway. Police were forced to open fire on a naked man who refused to stop chewing the face off of another man. We look into what could have caused this attack, and we have new details on just how much of the victim's face was literally bitten off. CBS 4's Tiffany Hellberg spoke to a police officer who was at the crime scene. She joins us live from Miami. And Tiffany, the officer believes the man clearly was on some very, very powerful drugs.
That's right, Cynthia. The Fraternal Order of Police president tells me this crop of LSD is a major threat to police officers as well as the rest of us. He says it turns normal people into monsters that possess this superhuman strength and no ability to feel pain. He believes that's what was behind the incident that unfolded here Saturday in broad daylight, this off the MacArthur Causeway exit right next to the Miami Herald, and it was the Herald's surveillance video that caught much of it on tape. Now, we want to warn you, much of the details you're about to hear are disturbing and gruesome.
It totally horrified me. This was probably in my 30 years as a police officer, the nastiest, most horrific incident I've ever seen.
An incident partially caught on camera by Miami Herald surveillance. Fraternal Order of Police President Armando Aguilar says that cop had no choice but to shoot when he found a naked man chewing away at another man's face.
Had his face completely eaten from the top of his forehead to almost his jaw. It wasn't just that he was being bit, is that actually swallowing pieces of his face.
His cannibalistic attacker unfazed by the officer's commands to stop.
And when the police approached him, he turned around and growled and kept attacking the victim on the floor.
That's when he says the officer shot him.
The initial shots had no effect. He had to repeatedly shoot him about 4 times until the man collapsed.
The naked attacker now dead on the sidewalk. There he is on the left. His now faceless victim lay on the ground next to him, likely writhing in pain as sources say he no longer had eyes or a nose.
I can only imagine by talking to the officer, I see that he's totally traumatized. It was like something out of a horror movie.
Aguilar says this is the worst out of about 4 similar cases in Dade County to happen recently. In other incidents, the people have admitted to taking a new strain of what they're calling bad LSD.
Their body temperature reaches such a high degree that they have to take all their clothes off because they're basically melting from the inside.
He says that was a case just blocks away on Bayshore Drive. That was in March when a bloody naked man who had been hit by a cab growled at police and showed superhuman strength when they tried to help him.
There was more than 10 or 15 officers on the scene, and even after they tasered the man 2 or 3 times, he was still able to take a baton away from one of our officers and severely damage her arm.
Scary stuff. Now, I'm told that man from the March incident did survive. As for the man related to this incident off the MacArthur Causeway who was attacked in the face, we know he is currently hospitalized in critical condition. Live in downtown Miami, Tiffany Helberg, CBS 4 News Tonight.
Unbelievable to hear it all. Thanks for that, Tiffany.
My God, there are no words. I mean, this is not an odd freak crime. This happened, like I said, the very next day, 26th of May 2012. The first one was the 25th of May 2012. Now, there's no evidence of any drugs being involved in the first incident. There's talk about LSD in the second incident, bath salts, which is another designer drug. This man was shot 4 times, tasered another 3 times, yet he carried on going. Now, blimey, I mean, it seems superhuman is not the word. It's all absolutely incredible. This is why I said you shouldn't let the children watch this video, okay? I did warn you at the start that you shouldn't let children watch this. Now, Harford County is interesting, whether it's a coincidence or not, but Harford County is actually very close to a place called Fort Detrick. Now, Fort Detrick is very important in the story, and I'm going to talk about it in more detail later, because it's a centre for a historically recognised US biowarfare program, that is, using biological agents, bacteria and viruses as weapons between 1943 and 1969. In fact, it carried on after 1969. I'll be talking about that later. There are many theories associated with this, and I do want you to have a peaceful night's sleep. You know, I've gone over the PSYOP theory, programming us in a certain way. These news stories, the Centre for Disease Control, the new era of zombie films, zombie imagery, books, various other tropes. Are these all connected? That's the question. I've also gone over the theory as whether these sort of paranormal phenomena of all kinds, UFOs and zombies being a part of this, is being used to disguise something else. It's a psyop to launder something else that is secret. Now, I know I dismissed that possibility in some areas, but could this be some kind of symbolic archetype? It's like in the early Cold War, there were lots of films about alien invasion. There was the TV series like The Invaders, creatures from another planet coming to Earth to make it their world. And it's very transparent today that these are allegorical communists. It's a big elbow in the ribs of Cold War propaganda he's talking about here. Today it's not communists anymore, but it's other undesirables. It's terrorists, immigrants, the unemployed, the homeless. You know, insert your name of some kind of subhuman culture here, or some kind of subhuman there, and you can insert that into the trope, into the imagery, and you have your particular brand of programming, of predictive programming. This societal and cultural programming is everywhere in the world. I mean, if you try and try and finding an end to it is impossible. It can be spotted in almost everything we see in our world around us. Now, if you apply this kind of programming to today's world, we have this symbolic scenario, it's most likely to result in pandemics. With the exception of the new Romero films, which are still maintain that old traditional supernatural element, we have sci-fi scenarios based on a virus, an infectious agent of some kind, something which is scientifically explicable as a part of this pandemic scenario, which includes the zombies. But some parts don't fit. Now, one of those things is the serious tone of the plans themselves. It's not allegorical. It's not symbolic in those terms. It seems to have the tone of being forthright. Now, the government already has PSYOPs in place for dealing with disease outbreaks. I mean, they're quite open about it. They already have scenarios laid out to do with terrorist attacks involving pandemics and the institution of germs. There's all kinds of different injections into our culture of that. Everything from Tom Clancy novels to news stories about anthrax. So why do they need more? That's the question. Now, this goes back a long way actually, because I did a little scenario a long time ago about what happened at my hospital. Let me just see if I can find the little element here. No, it's not there. I've actually lost it. I actually called up the page. It's gone. Where is it? Where is it? Where are you? And that is that. Here we go. This is way back in 2008. I wrote this. But this is an article on the Herpanmo blog. Oxford Hospital Terrorist Drill. And you can see there's the cover of the hospital newspaper. John Radcliffe hosts major incident exercise. And there you have the different pages I've filmed. And feel free to pause and read if you want to read this article, or go to the Oxford Hospital Terrorist Drill. There's the URL there. I'm not going to put too many links in the description box, but there we are. There we go. Ooh. So that's the situation to do with the hospital. Where are we? So this is not disinformation, I don't think, or at least not in the conventional type of disinformation, which is something designed to be symbolic of something else. It's not like these secret government operations like fake UFOs, if these even exist, which I doubt, but there are many examples of disinformation which I've talked about. I don't think, but we are talking about something literal here, I think, although maybe not the way we're thinking of. I think it may be. I was drawn to the PSYOP theory, but I'm not entirely sure. I think if it is a PSYOP, it's something it's something literal, relating to something literal. It's not like symbolic of terrorists or whatever. I mean, it's possible. I mean, there is an outside chance that these contingency planners are having a laugh, because, like in the zombie apocalypse movie, there was a big joke around the emergency planners, because you must imagine in planning for these disasters must be a pretty grim job, and you must have developed a rather ghoulish sense of humour, you know. So when asked about what to do, they, instead of writing something out, they put the initials RAFS. It stands for run away fucking screaming. And that's kind of an in-joke among emergency planners for to sort of relieve the gloom that they must feel when planning for these disasters. However, as I said, it doesn't fit with the serious nature of these articles. Now, you may think I'm going around in circles here and I'm not meeting myself in the middle, because I'm not. I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. Every time I go into one idea and try to make it fit to another, it doesn't quite link. But I know something's going on here. Something very, very serious is going on here. And so it goes on. Because shortly afterwards I came across this in the National Geographic Daily News. Zombie virus, possible rabies flu hybrid. And this is something the people involved in the update, which I'm going to discuss in a minute, that's something they go into as well. what happened was there was the National Geographic Daily News, an article by Ken Than for National Geographic News, published October the 27th, 2010. So this is some months before Dr. Khan's Preparedness 101 blog entry. And it reads like this. In the zombie flicks like 28 Days Later and I Am Legend, an unstoppable viral plague sweeps across humanity, transforming people into mindless monsters with cannibalistic tendencies. Although dead humans can't come back to life, apparently, we'll go into that later as well, certain viruses can induce such aggressive zombie-like behaviour. Scientists say in the new National Geographic Channel documentary, The Truth Behind Zombies, premiering Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. National Geographic News is part of the National Geographic Society. For instance, rabies, a disease which infects the central nervous system, can drive people violently mad, according to Dr. Samita Andriansky, a virologist at the University of Miami's Miller School of Medicine in Florida. Now, Miami, Florida, that's where the second of those zombie attacks took place. The man who had his face attacked. Is that a coincidence? Now, the question was, here we go. Combine rabies with the ability of a flu virus to spread quickly through the air, and you might have the makings of a zombie apocalypse. Is a rabies virus mutation possible? Now, unlike movie zombies, which become reanimated almost immediately after infection, the first signs a human has rabies, such as anxiety, confusion, hallucinations, paralysis, these don't typically appear for 10 days to a year later, and as the virus incubates inside the body. Now, once rabies sets in, though, it's usually fatal within a week if left untreated. If the genetic code of the rabies virus experienced enough changes or mutation, its incubation time could be reduced dramatically. Many viruses have naturally high mutation rates and constantly change as a means of evading or bypassing the defences of their hosts. There are various ways viral mutations can occur, for example through copying mistakes during gene replication or exposure to ultraviolet light. If a rabies virus can mutate fast enough, it could cause infection within an hour or a few hours. That's entirely plausible. Airborne rabies would create a rage virus. But for the rabies virus to trigger a zombie pandemic, like in the movies, it would also have to become much more contagious. Now, humans typically catch rabies after being bitten by an infected animal, like a dog, and the infection usually stops there. They can't spread it after that. Thanks to pet vaccinations, people very rarely contract rabies in the United States today, and even fewer people die from the disease. For example, in 2008, there were only 2 cases of human rabies infection, and no deaths were reported to the US Centre for Disease Control and Prevention. Them again! A faster mode of transmission would be through the air, which is how the influenza virus spreads. All rabies has to do is go airborne, and you have the rage virus, like in 28 Days Later. To be transmitted by air, rabies would have to borrow traits from another virus, such as influenza. Different forms or strains of the same virus can swap pieces of genetic code through a process called reassortment or recombination, but unrelated viruses simply do not hybridize in nature. Likewise, it's scientifically unheard of for 2 radically different viruses such as rabies and flu to borrow traits. They're too different, they cannot share genetic information. Viruses assemble only parts that belong to them, and they don't mix and match from different families. Is an engineered virus possible? It is theoretically possible, though extremely difficult, to create a hybrid rabies influenza virus using genetic engineering techniques. Sure, I could imagine a scenario where you mix rabies with a flu virus to get airborne transmission, a measles virus to get personality changes, the encephalitis virus to infect your brain with fever, thus increase aggression even further, and throw in Ebola virus to cause internal bleeding. Combine all these things and you get something like a zombie virus, she said. But nature doesn't allow all of these things to happen at the same time. You'd most likely just get a dead virus. But that's not true. And do you spot the flaw? Do you spot the error in that article? The error is that maybe nature doesn't allow these things. But who said nature is behind every virus? And this is something we're going to come on to now. This is a film called In Lies We Trust. It's the CIA, Hollywood and bioterrorism. It's a documentary by Dr. Leonard George Horowitz. That's him there, not him. It's a 3-hour plus documentary all about this subject, which is absolutely, I would say, is absolutely vital background information for anyone studying this subject. It's encyclopedic, actually, and you can get it on YouTube. It's very easy to come across. Very easy indeed to come across. Please do go and watch it. Dr. Len Horowitz is a dentist. He's a public health expert, and his film is about the history of biological warfare and terrorism, which basically is the same thing. Now, he talks about various organisations such as the CDC, the Department of Homeland Security, and the CIA, and how they are behind what we could today call bioterrorism, this idea that it's not actually been done yet, but terrorists could use disease as a weapon or as an economical and political ploy. But according to Horowitz, this whole program has been developed openly, but it's also been developed in secrecy behind the guise of what's known as the war against cancer and other diseases. The war on cancer is actually a title, it's a name, and it's connected with depopulation, genocide and eugenics, which is a scary subject, but it's got to be talked about. Now, in 1967 a book was published by someone called Leonard Lewin, which was the alleged minutes of a meeting which took place in 1963. The book was called Report from Iron Mountain, and you can get it online. I do recommend you get it online. You go and get it. Now, there's no such place as Iron Mountain, so Iron Mountain must be code word for something. Maybe a secret basement under the Pentagon or the White House. We don't know. But the meetings of these people was a secret in-camera meeting of senior government officials and military officers and strategists, social warfare strategists, and what comes out was intensely candid, so different from how politicians talk when they're addressing the public. One of the things they said was that, this is a quote, "War is necessary for the survival of social systems we know today, the government, the church, corporations. Even if a lasting peace could be achieved, it would almost certainly not be in the best interests of society to achieve it. The government, as we know it, could not exist without war. War also serves a vital function of diverting collective aggression. We recommend that bodies be created to emulate the economic and social functions of war." Now, this is straight out of George Orwell, isn't it? It really is. "In the absence of war, a viable political substitute for war must posit a generalised external menace to each society, or a nature and degree sufficient to require the organisation and acceptance of political authority." This is what David Icke calls, in 3 words, problem, reaction, solution. Control, and it said here, control, and this comes on to the revolution in military affairs, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Control of the people without the fear of large-scale wars. That is, without world wars like World War II and World War One. Substitutes for war. And this is what it talks about. And it goes on to discuss things such as population reduction and eugenics. That is that there are too many people in the world, and governments, it's in the interest of governments to reduce the number of people by a huge factor. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Agenda 21 and things like that, which I think are connected to this. Now, according to the official story, Leonard Lewin wrote this book as a satirical spoof. It wasn't real, but it's astonishingly, I don't know, astonishingly perceptive. I mean, how did he know this stuff? If you look at other sources, for instance, just 4 years later, a book came out by Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1970 called Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. So, and that talks about basically the same thing. Now, Horowitz goes on to talk about the history of biological warfare. There's a scene here from a biological warfare laboratory, as you see there. It has a long history. During the Crusades, the Crusaders used to attack each other's fortresses by tossing the bodies of plague victims into the fortress on a catapult. They used to hurl these things inside the fortress and to spread disease among the fortified towns. The modern era, it goes back to the World War II. There's a lot of also even before World War II with the Nazis. Also with the Japanese, during Japan's war with China throughout the 1930s, the Japanese used prisoners of war. They used to carry out the most horrific biological warfare experiments on prisoners of war. And you might think, oh, horrible Japanese for doing that. But actually, the truth of the matter is, the Allied side in World War II did exactly the same, and our own countries have done exactly the same. Wherever, if you live in the West, anywhere you live, your own country is equally responsible for almost equally bad experiments. One organisation that was behind these from the start was the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Rockefeller Foundation worked alongside the Nazis in their firstly their biological operations to do with eugenics and preserving the master race, things like that. But also after the war, the Rockefellers organised Operation Paperclip, which brought a lot of these scientists back. What happened was after the destruction of Nazi Germany at the end of that war, there was a massive, not a brain drain, a brain capture of all the various Nazi scientists for use by the Allied side. Some of them went to America, some of them, a minority went to the Soviet Union, but America got the lion's share. A few of them went to Britain as well, and other countries. The most famous of these Operation Paperclip scientists is Werner von Braun, who designed the Apollo space rockets, which took men to the moon, or didn't, depending on your point of view. I think didn't, but you might disagree. And of course, they also got a lot of the biological warfare and eugenics scientists as well. And they went to work at this place called Fort Detrick that was set up after World War II to work on the American biowarfare program. Now in 1970, a document was written, same year as Brzezinski published his book called The Revolution in Military Affairs of the American War College. And this talked about a shift in strategy, in warfare strategy, from conventional battlefield warfare, away from nuclear weapons, and away from simple biological and chemical warfare, to smaller scale, more subtle, sophisticated biological warfare. This wouldn't involve anything like plague victims or anything like that. It mentions cancer viruses, and by that time it was well known that many viruses are actually caused by cancer. For instance, cervical cancer in women is caused by a virus. There's various other types of virus caused by cancer, caused by many other cancers caused by viruses. And it talks about using cancer viruses, genetically modified bacteria, and I'm going to come to that in a minute when I talk about the update to this whole story, but also electromagnetic weapons and psychology. And the psychology bit is particularly interesting and sinister because it said, this report from this Revolution in Military Affairs, they admitted quite openly, what we are suggesting is contrary to American values. Therefore, we must use the media to contain unconditioned individuals. That's basically saying, comes into the fact that, well, what I've been talking about, these various ideas in the media being put out. Unconditioned individuals are people like me and you, probably watching this, who don't go along with this and would never agree to it and have the ability to think through it and the will to think through it. One of the advantages, they said, of this new scenario, this new sophisticated form of biological warfare, was plausible deniability. That with cancer viruses and other genetically modified viruses, there's a long delay between infection and emergence of the pathology. So when you use these bioweapons, there's no way of knowing for sure where they came from. You can never prove where they came from. This meant it's possible to wage a war secretly. There's no need to declare war openly. You can actually attack and defeat an enemy without anyone ever knowing that you did it. Because there could be a 10-year gap between you launching the weapon and the weapon going off. But you would take them out as surely as you would if you dropped a whole phalanx of nuclear weapons on them. A whole salvo of bombs. It's really horrific to talk about this and to imagine people even thinking about it. I mean, it gives you an insight into the psychopathic mentality of this system and the people who they select to run it. It really does. Now you may think, well, that's nothing. That's just you may think that it's just a report. No one took it seriously, but the actual origins of the report go back a long way. In fact, they begin in Britain in 1942. In 1942, there was something called, it was a very ironic name, it was called Operation Vegetarian. Here's a photo taken during Operation Vegetarian. An island called Grunyard Island off the coast of Scotland was sequestered by the Ministry of War and to test anthrax as a possible biological weapon. They dropped anthrax onto the island and poisoned with a lot of sheep, and they basically watched the sheep die. I'm very fond of sheep, actually. It upsets me when I hear people say that. Don't look at me like that. I may be a Welsh boy, but I don't mean it like that. Anyway, they watched these sheep die, and the plan was to actually drop animal feed infected with anthrax all over Germany during World War II. The livestock would eat the livestock, the cattle and other livestock would eat the feed. They'd be infected with anthrax, the people would eat the meat, and basically the entire population of Germany would infect anthrax and die. So basically the UK Allied government had a genocidal policy towards Germany in the World War II. And it's very, very important to realise when it comes to World War II that all the propaganda, our whole concept of World War II is wrong. All right, we're told that it is good guys against bad guys. The good guys are the Allies fighting the nasty old Nazis. No, like most wars, it's not good guys versus bad guys. It's bad guys versus bad guys. The Allies were just as bad, if not worse, than the Nazis during World War II. Nobody won that war in the end, except the elite, and the people of both sides were the ones defeated. It's a big subject to go into, but that's in an outline. That was anthrax. That was the anthrax program in the UK government in World War II. Now, the longest, it goes back much further than that actually in the United States, because this is the darkest part of American history. And this is the Tuskegee Human Experimentation Program, which ran from 1932 to 1972. So that's 32 to 42 to 52 to 62 to 72. That's a 40-year program, all right? It's absolutely horrific. What they were doing quite openly is they were giving syphilis to black people in rural communities of the United States and then watching them get ill and die. It's almost unbelievable. It's so unbelievable that most Americans don't even realise it happened and have no awareness of it. And basically, through denial, they don't want to face that it actually happened. But it did happen, and there's an attempt to get compensation, things like that. But being aware of this really should, I think, there's no excuse for anyone who is aware of this information still trusting their government, all right? If you know about this and you still go along with what they say and believe in what they do, then you're a fool. And I've got no sympathy for you. There's just no excuse for it. You really have to wake up and see what's going on in this scenario. You really, really do. Yeah, it goes on. Now, Horowitz talks about in his video about the SV40 polio scandal. Now, this is another very, very controversial part of American history. As this poster said, 90 million Americans were given polio vaccine contaminated with cancer-causing viruses, admits the CDC. So again, we have the CDC again coming into it. This organisation, the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, or control and prevention being the Orwellian opposites, of course, in reality. It basically means that people, when they were originally given the polio virus, were exposed to this SV40 virus, which is it's a virus from apes, which somehow got into the virus, but it infects humans too, because humans, of course, are a primate. We're a type of ape. And these vaccines were first given in 1955, and it took until 1961. It took 7 years before it was discovered. And in that time, how many people, as they said, all these Americans were given this virus that might cause cancer in humans. Now, the idea is that, it was a terrible accident. We didn't really mean it. It just somehow this virus got into the polio vaccine by accident. And of course, we didn't do it on purpose. It was just an accident. Well, this has happened all at once. I mean, I was watching a film the other day called Hear the Silence, which is a movie about the Andrew Wakefield story, which is about the MMR jab, which is much more recent. In fact, it was started in Britain in the 1990s, and Dr. Andrew Wakefield was a man who identified the dangers of the measles, mumps and rubella vaccine and went public with it, and was basically shot down and destroyed. His career was destroyed. But the truth of the matter is, when there was actually a meningitis-causing virus, which was actually found in the first batch of MMR, called Urabi. Now again, are we supposed to believe that when it just happened by accident? I mean, it gets rather silly, I must say. It gets rather Absurd, really, really does. So again, do not believe your government. Or if you still believe your government after knowing this information, I'm afraid you have suicidal tendencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's the only thing I can tell you. Now, in 1969, the biological warfare program officially ended, and there is President Richard Nixon announcing the end of the US biowarfare program at Fort Detrick, Maryland, which Dr. Len Horowitz talks about. Nixon announced this in 1970, but he lied. What happened was he announced the offensive biological warfare program had come to an end, and that was true. The problem was in 1970 the biological warfare program itself did not come to an end. It merely changed to a defensive formation. Now, in terms of biological warfare, defensive, it's the same thing. It doesn't make any difference whether it's an offensive or defensive formation. So the program continued. In fact, the budget doubled the following year, in 1971. And this is in line with the Revolution in Military Affairs document. It talks about not just simple infectious disease producers, long-term chronic viruses, cancer, immunodeficiency, AIDS. AIDS is immunodeficiency virus. And that brings us on to another subject, which Horowitz also talks about in the film. This here is Dr. Robert Gallo. He actually used to work for a company called Lytton Industries, manufacturing vaccines, and he developed actually a experimental vaccine for hepatitis B, and he gave that vaccine in a test. He decided to do a test. Yeah, where is it? Here we go. I think I've gone a bit far. I don't know. It's okay. Gallo decided to give this vaccine in a test to a group of homosexual men in California, and he did that. He also gave it to a group of African men as well. And now this was in 1977 that this program was begun, and through some enormous coincidence, because it has to be, doesn't it? In 1980, a group of gay men in California began to fall ill of a new disease. This disease was named acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. It was identified by, guess who? Dr. Robert Gallo. Oddly enough, this disease emerged in the same group who had the vaccine tested on them. Now, of course, that is just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. This brings us on to a new idea, which I have to deal with because it is part of the motivation that a lot of these people feel for what they do, is overpopulation. Picture the poor old Earth there, way down with so many people. Oh. Overpopulation. I've talked a lot about this in the past. Is that in other films? But it's worth noting that, before I go on, to say that if you say there's no evidence for this, I should point out that the Fort Detrick is the home for the biological warfare program, but it's also home of the National Cancer Institute in 1971. It moved in there. So that's a rather strange choice of neighbours, don't you think? Now, on to population reduction. During the last few decades, the state of the Earth's environment has become one of the biggest causes of concern for the people of the world, and this is another tenet that was actually in the report from Iron Mountain. There's a lot of fears out there of disasters, global warming, peak oil, destruction of natural habitats, biodiversity, soil erosion, water shortages, and there's a lot of drive to find solutions to these problems, and it's become especially intensely political. I mean, global warming, climate change, whatever you choose to call it, that has especially become very, very political. I mean, I doubt the whole scenario behind climate change myself, but there's no doubt that most people believe it, including some very, very powerful and very influential people. Now, a lot of this has been linked basically to population levels, and the idea that really the whole source of this is the idea that there are too many people in the world. This is the notion. Now, this whole idea, population depopulation, it has an acceptable public face, and there's an organisation called Population Matters, and it's the head of Population Matters. The president is none other than David Attenborough. You know, that sweet old man who sits around playing with gorillas in the jungle, And population matters say things like about educating, giving people contraception, educating women to take control of their fertility. Please have less children, we'll give you birth control. But the urgency and severity of the problem, or the perceived problem, has generated a new brand of environmental extremist, and it's very, very different, a very stark departure actually from those well-meaning bearded guys with glasses and life jackets who used to sail their boats into the path of whaling ships. You just don't get them anymore. Modern eco-warriors, they're rich, they're powerful, they're businessmen, they're academics, they're politicians. They wear suits and ties and they have secret meetings in boardrooms. Now I should point out that in the course of these secret meetings, I suggest that report from Iron Mountain was one of them. And they're very, very different from the public face, Population Matters, David Attenborough. I mean, they're saying, you know, can we do this? Can we really, really achieve this while preserving liberal piety? And they've decided, no, they can't. And some of them are they're partly coming out of the closet. They're at least opening the closet door a little crack. And one of the bad cops of depopulation is of course, Bill Gates, who's spoken quite openly on a stage at a TED talk, a TED conference, the same one that banned Graham Hancock and Rupert Sheldrake. They had Bill Gates on there talking about what he was up to, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And he was talking about how he said quite openly, vaccines are there to achieve depopulation, lowering the population. And it seemed to go over everyone's head because no one really responded to that, which is very, very strange. It's a peculiar situation that Bill Gates is actually part of this agenda. The nice man who produced this computer that you're watching this film on, or produced the software for it, is behind a plot to depopulate the world. And I should actually mention that there's an obvious question we should ask Bill, actually. Bill, if you want to depopulate the world, you know, here's an obvious question for you. This wise lady's holding up a good planet. Save the planet, kill yourself. So why, yeah, exactly. I mean, if Bill Gates really wants, you know, most of the people in the world to commit suicide, how come the people who say that now don't volunteer to go first? Come on, Bill, jump off a cliff. Set a good example, guy. Come on. Of course they don't, do they? Now, what's interesting is there's been an update on this, which is one of the reasons I want to make this video, and that is that Roxy Lopez, who's a very, very good radio show host in America, she has had an interview with two very, very interesting guys, Patrick Jordan and Dr. Will Spencer, and you can actually, I'll just play you a little clip of the video, and you can. I'll put a link in the description box to that too. Right, I'll just remind myself to do that. Excuse me a moment. I'll just put here Roxy Lopez, just to remind myself here. But I'll just play you a little link to. I'll just play you a few minutes of. I'll just play you a couple of minutes of the video. This is the interview with Roxy Lopez and Dr. Patrick Jordan, Dr. Will Spencer. Damn, we've got an advertisement. Excuse me a moment. Oh. Let me just turn the sound down a moment because we have an advertisement. Of course, you have to have an advertisement. And people have asked me why I don't monetize my YouTube videos. Well, firstly, how much money am I realistically going to make? And secondly, it's another ad. I hate it when I get adverts, and I don't want to subject people to those adverts. I want people to. Here's a list of what the story is about in the article. Proof of zombies in the modern world. Types of zombies, viral parasitic zombies, radiation zombies, experiment gone wrong zombies, voodoo zombies, rise from the dead zombies. And it gives you a bit of background into the zombie apocalypse. Will Spencer of Zombies Themselves. Will Spencer will discuss how human beings are being mutated, as well as the gene pool to being altered via different methods of the food chain. Author Patrick Jordan follows suit with evidence to support zombies are real indeed, and has built a chart in order to demonstrate different levels of zombification. Patrick also states that we are looking at behavioural molecular switches, mind control, MK, and just generations bred super rats. What I'm saying, and what no one wants to hear, is that we're already dead. And this is it is very, very sobering, but it's worth watching. It does end as always, with a positive note, which is at least the information is getting out, and we can do something to stop it. Zombie apocalypse, it talks about toxoplasmosis, which is a disease which people actually pick up from cats. So cats, of course, are very common. If you own a cat, you probably have it already in your system, dormant. It's not. There are things you can do about toxoplasmosis, but there's talk about salmonella. They also talk about salmonella being used. This is the video being used to act as a container. They take the inside out of a salmonella bacteria, all the gooey stuff inside, the genetic material, and put in rabies. And this goes back to that National Geographic story I was telling you about. We'll just play a little bit of the video.
I completely understand what you're saying when you go into agencies and you talk to people and they refer or defer you to higher ups, etc., etc., etc. No one
branch out, unfold in front of my eyes that in one of the superfamilies of disease, there was this thing called allograft rejection. Now, anybody that's been in hospitals, clinics, the health kill scenario knows what that means. What it means is that the allo means not self. Graft means what it means. So if you had an organ transplant, that's an allograft because it did not come from you. Because you can have your own skin grafted onto yourself and you won't have a rejection. But your body rejects anything that didn't come from you. You know, back in the day, they were transplanting baboon hearts into humans just to see if it would work. That's an allograft. It's a xenograft. It comes from another species. And your body does not like that. And while I was going through the Weizmann Institute trees of, diseases as they were related in this genetic manner, I saw the disease, the subgrouping of allograft rejection, and I also saw this continuous line of candida infection. Now, one of the selling points of his book is what he tells of.
That's very. I do recommend watching the whole of that interview and listening to it, and you can actually get it. There's a link in the description box where you can get that. Now it's possible there's something even more complicated going on here, even more complicated than what Len Horowitz has discovered, and it goes beyond conventional biowarfare or any other form of biowarfare into other realms. This is something that Horowitz doesn't cover in his book. It's not mentioned in Report from Iron Mountain as far as I know. Here's some video. Here's some images. You may guess what I'm talking about. Someone with lesions on their skin and these little fibres that keep coming out. That is Morgellons disease. Morgellons is a disease that's come out recently in which people experience most horrific skin irritation, which often results in lesions coming out. Sometimes you have to scratch your skin, and sometimes this creates lesions. Sometimes the lesions appear spontaneously, but very, very strange discharge appears when those lesions appear. They give off a very, very strange discharge, which includes very, very small fibres. Now, conventional doctors think that there's nothing wrong, it's just hysteria, people getting hysterical, and the fibres are just little bits of cotton fabric which are trapped in the wounds from dressing. It's basically dressing fibres that gets trapped in scabs when scabs form underneath a dressing. The fibres trap in the wound. But these things move. You can see them moving. They squiggle like little worms. And other things come out too, like tiny little stones or crystals, like jewellery, minute crystal structures, and even tiny machines, minute mechanical devices come out of these wounds from our bodies. This is what Morgellons disease sufferers have reported, and it's been documented. There's a lady called Sophia Smallstorm I very much recommend watching, because she's done some lectures about this. She studied it in details, and she has linked Morgellons to chemtrails. And it's possible that the chemtrails that we see over our heads now we've been told it's some kind of secret geoengineering program, which would fit in indirectly to Report from Iron Mountain and these other things to do with the population and climate change. But maybe that's just the excuse. Maybe that's just what they tell the pilots and other people involved in it, people who mix the chemicals. Maybe the real reason is something different. It could be to do with using high technology and this kind of biotechnology to transform life on Earth, including humans. And this is a form of transhumanism. where humans are taken from our natural biological state into something else. Transhumanism is the how do I define it? Let me just get it up on Wikipedia and see what it says, because this is very, very important. Excuse me one moment. But you must have seen Ray Kurzweil, the proponent, and I'll just here we are. It's an international cultural and intellectual movement with the eventual goal of fundamentally transforming the human condition by developing and making widely available technologies to greatly enhance human intellectual, physical and psychological capacities. Transhumanist thinkers study the potential benefits and dangers of emerging technologies that could overcome fundamental human limitations. Now that is basically how Wikipedia defines transhumanism. You listen to Ray Kurzweil, it all sounds very, very nice. He makes it sound like something wonderful. But it's in fact, as Max Egan has rightly pointed out, transhumanism is designed to make things better, but how many changes could come to our humanity without taking it away? How could we change physically to the point where we'll no longer be human? And what's beneficial to the elite might not be beneficial to the rest of us. As you're well aware, I think that we have a political class in this world that is trying to enslave us, turn us into basically farm animals or robots, and transhumanism could be a part of that. I mean, transhumanism is wrapped in such nice wrapping paper. It comes to us as a present with a nice little ribbon on it, it'll make you faster, it'll make you better, it'll make you stronger, it'll make you live longer, or even immortal. You won't even die. You'll become immortal. That's how it's presented to us. The eventual idea is what they call Operation 2040, which is where they will actually back engineer the human brain in electronic form, which means our brain technically could be uploaded to a computer and will become computerized. But then if that happens, it gives an awful lot of power to the elite. If we're uploaded to the computer, what's to stop some member of the Illuminati telling us what to do, and if we refuse, shut down, restart, format, and we're dead. So that's something to think. This is something that could be connected with this whole scenario that I'm talking about relating to zombies. It may fit in with Morgellons. And that is very concerning, very worrying, but it's good that people talk about it. Now, another scenario that's come out, which I think is relates to a report and research done by this man. This is David Griffin, a ufologist and conspiratorial researcher who's actually a good friend of mine. Actually, we know each other quite well. David came out with some very, very interesting information relating to the Falklands War. Now, the Falkland Islands, as you're aware, these small islands in the South Atlantic, not far from the coast of Argentina, they're currently part of the British Overseas Protectorate. There's about 3,000 people who live there who all want to remain British. Now, Argentina invaded those islands in 1982 and took them over until Margaret Thatcher sent a task force to recapture them and kick out the Argentine occupiers. Now, we were told that Margaret Thatcher did this because out of the kindness of her heart, the fact she cared about the people who wanted to remain British, and the islands which was British territory. So on one level you could say that was right, but since I can understand that point of view to say it was justifiable, that war in that sense. But the question I have to ask is, how often does the government ever do something out of the kindness of their heart? Have they ever done it before? They say they're doing it out of the kindness of their heart. How often do they? Do you really believe that Britain went to the Falkland Islands, sent a naval task force and the army to the Falklands to kick out the Argentines because they cared about the people and they cared about these islands, a few turnip farms, some sheep? No. Britain did not go and recapture the Falklands for that reason, and of course Argentina didn't invade them in the first place for that reason either. Now, I've often said, that these things, you often find that trouble seems to break out where they strike oil. Now, in Darfur, the war there broke out after they struck oil. And the same can be said for the Falklands, because a huge oil field was discovered a couple of years before the invasion. But there may be more to it than that, and David Griffin has discovered that. He's discovered that it may relate to what he calls what is known as sentient fluid or nano oil. And I do recommend you go to the Amash project or the Bases series of films done by what used to be Miles Johnston and Joanne Summerscales. Now it's just Miles Johnston. But there's an interview which Miles has done with David where he talks about sentient fluid, and Miles has spoken about sentient fluid himself, or nano oil. This is a substance that resembles oil. It looks like this. It's black, it's fluid, it's viscous. And you might think, well, that's what it is, but it actually is not oil. It's actually intelligent fluid. It actually moves. It has the ability to communicate. It has the ability to infect itself into other people's, into people, into animals, into objects. And David Griffin discovered that nano oil was a part of the Falklands War because there's an island called Southern Thule where there was an Argentine base set up there illegally in the 70s, which no one bothered to do anything about because Southern Thule is so remote and so cold. But there were aliens called Little Blues, or they were called blue aliens, I think, and they were living on the island, and the scientists at the base knew about it. And and it related to this oil. Now, something very interesting happened during the Falklands War because, as I said, no one ever bothered to do anything about this Argentine base on Southern Thule. Now, Southern Thule is part of the Falkland Island dependencies. Now, at the end of the war, the Royal Naval ship HMS Endurance, which is the polar patrol vessel for the Royal Navy, went to Southern Thule with the Royal Marine Special Forces to recapture Southern Thule after the rest of the Falkland Islands had been captured. This was. Now, the Special Forces landed on the island. The existing Argentines that were there, they were just a handful of scientists and a small squad of soldiers. They were vastly outnumbered, so they did the sensible thing, they surrendered. And the Special Forces took them aboard HMS Endurance, and they were basically taken on Endurance back to Argentina at the end of the war. But before they left, the Royal Marine Special Forces planted explosives, an enormous amount of explosives, on the base at Southern Thule and blew it sky high. And it's absolutely unbelievable. There's actually a photograph. There's no film, but there's a photograph of this operation taking place. And you can. Talk about a sledgehammer to crack a nut. They used an enormous amount of explosives on what was essentially just a couple of huts. And the reason David thinks this happened was because of this nano oil. And it goes on further because, and this is image 270, I believe. Something else happened in the Gulf of Mexico. There was something called the Berserk incident. This is where it was actually posted on an internet forum called Godlike Productions. Now, internet forums are not a very good place of finding crucial information. I tend to find you very rarely get good information from internet forums, but occasionally you do. In this case, you did, and this was that what was found was. They basically, the opening poster on this thread said something just went berserk in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, he has a girlfriend who works in the French embassy in the United States. This girl is reporting that there was a huge hoo-ha in the Gulf of Mexico, which of course had been the scene of this massive oil spill in 2010. A French submarine had entered US territorial waters and picked something up. What had happened was the Americans had attacked the French submarine by dropping depth charges on it from a helicopter. The submarine surfaced and there was an attempt to board the submarine with special forces. This failed and the submarine got underway, but suddenly other submarines appeared from Germany, from Israel, and there was basically some kind of sea battle. The Israeli submarine shot down the American helicopter. The German submarine tried to attack the special forces. It was like the Jutland. It was absolutely appalling, and this was never reported in the media. However, Duncan Rose, the editor of Nexus magazine, decided to check it out. So he found out if there were any unusual shipping movements in the Gulf of Mexico at the time, and apparently there was. An exclusion zone had been set up in the Gulf of Mexico, and commercial shipping was warned to stay away, which seems an odd coincidence. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the French submarine escaped. It took the whatever it had captured from the Americans' territorial waters in the Gulf with it, which seems connected in some way with the oil spill, and it transferred its cargo to a French ship, surface ship, which an aircraft carrier, I think, which then set sail for France. Now, a few hours into the journey to France, the captain of the ship reported through to the French Admiralty permission to jettison the cargo. This cargo that the French had just gone to so many lengths to attain. The captain of the ship asked permission to jettison it because it had, quote, come to life, unquote. Maybe we're talking here about the nano oil, the sentient fluid. Maybe this is connected with the berserk situation in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, as I record these words, I'm sitting in Nottingham, or a town just outside Nottingham. Now, in just a few miles from where I'm sitting is the major laboratory for the Boots Corporation, I forgot the name of the actual laboratory, the company that owns Boots, the chemist. But they have a major laboratory, their headquarters here in Nottingham, and according to Alistair Martin, a witness to the Amash project and Basis series, the sentient fluid was actually taken to there and developed, and they did experiments on, and it was released into the sewage system. So, not far from where I'm sitting, a few miles away, this sentient fluid was released into the sewage system. Now, I find it hard to believe that was done accidentally. Something as dangerous as nano oil, the sentient fluid as it's supposed to be, would not be released accidentally into the water table, into the water that we drink, into the environment. It's worrying, and this ties in, as David Griffin explains, with Marconi, the company Marconi, and how there were a number of mysterious suicides of people working for Marconi. Oh, it's a bit of a morass, and I'm not sure exactly what to make of it, but we have updates now from the Roxy Lopez at the Truth Denied Radio, and I think this is coming to a head. This is why I'm making this film. I think the poor quality of my previous film is not good enough, this is why I want to get this information out. Now, is the Morgellons disease and nano oil connected to zombies? It could be, because it is definitely about changing people, about changing life. New life, transhumanism, pseudo-life, as Sophia Smallstorm calls it. Could zombies be the byproduct? This is the question. This is the big question. Now, this comes back, I think, to the most interesting of the zombie films that I've talked about. I'll just go back and find the relevant picture. I'll just flick through it. Here we go. This is still, like I said, from the film Resident Evil. Now, Resident Evil was originally a computer game, but it was made into a series of films actually, about 6 films, and they're very, very interesting and very, very well worth watching. I think you can get them online now, they're in the public domain. They centre around a situation in which there is something called the Umbrella Corporation, which is an evil group of people who are developing biological weapons, and they develop something called the T-virus, which escapes. And it escapes from their underground base, which is their headquarters, into the population and creates a zombie pandemic. Now, the rest of the series of films it's almost a classic zombie apocalypse scenario, how the remaining people in the world survive with this zombie apocalypse going on, which is destroying all life on Earth. Now, the main protagonist in the film series is this character here called Alice, and she is played by the actress Mila Jovovich. Now, what's interesting about Alice is she is an exceptional individual, because she is a human, not a zombie, but she has been infected by the T-virus. Now, when the T-virus infects her, it has a very different effect for some reason. She doesn't become a zombie, she becomes a superhuman. She becomes almost a transhuman. She's faster, she's more quick thinking, she can run faster, she's stronger. She becomes essentially a super soldier, as it's called nowadays. And what's more, later on in the film series, you find out that she develops psychic powers. Telekinesis, clairvoyance, psychokinesis, things like that. I do recommend you watch the Resident Evil series of films to get I don't know where on earth do these filmmakers get their ideas. It's unbelievable. It really strikes me. I wonder how much these people know. So what I'm talking about we're talking about a situation of transhumanism, and that zombies are some kind of byproduct, or maybe they are a product, because in the Resident Evil film, someone has the idea later on in the series of movies, I think it's the 4th or 5th film, to make the zombies do work, to turn them into some kind of slave race. And maybe that is the intention. It's not a byproduct, it's the intention. So, in conclusion, we're looking at the emergence of some new kind of disease. It's different to what we've ever faced before, whether it's man-made, whether it's natural, whether it's extraterrestrial in origin, we don't know. But it has a very different purpose, it's a very different type of agent as any other disease we find before. It has a different role. It's about changing people, creating pseudo-life or new life. And it relates to transhumanism, it relates to all these other subjects I've talked about, and the zombie images we've seen in the media today, and the zombie, the whole zombie scenario that we find spoken about quite seriously in the media and in government agencies. I mean, another possibility we have to face is that, I mean, I think it's something that has to be thought of. Is maybe that the possibility of literal supernatural zombies. In other words, we come full circle and we've gone back to the ancient mythology of Africa, the Bokors, and the zombie creation of zombies through magical means. Could they appear naturally? Could they be conjured artificially through occult and supernatural methods? Now, I'm interested in the occult, and I've learned that there are rites and rituals that supposedly have the power to reanimate a dead body. Now, we're not just talking about a person with a disease now, we're talking about a body that is literally dead, being reanimated. Now, this is the case with the T-virus in the Resident Evil films. These are not infected people, these are dead bodies that have died and then become infected, although they infect other people through bites. And as Will Spencer, Dr. Will Spencer and Mr. Jordan talk about in the Roxy Lopez show, it's in a sense it's reproduction. It's because these viruses don't reproduce sexually. They can't create young babies, eggs, spores. They can't do that. They can only reproduce by invading a host and using the host's own cells to reproduce themselves, by infecting the host cells. Now, zombies are almost macroviruses. They're multicellular organisms that cannot reproduce sexually. So they reproduce in the same way as viruses do, on a macro level. They bite something, they bite a living organism, and they infect the living organism with the zombie agent, whether it's supernatural, whether it's scientifically explicable as a virus or disease. And this spreads the zombie pandemic. And this is why you really need to listen. Do follow the link and listen to that update from Roxy Lopez. Please do. So we're going back full circle to the traditions of Africa, but also the zombie concept exists in Western occult lore. Aleister Crowley and people like this are people you need to look at. Now, this is a line from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is one of the oldest surviving stories on Earth. It comes out of Mesopotamia in the 3rd millennium BC. I will knock down the gates of the underworld. I will smash the doorposts and leave the doors to fall flat down. And I will let the dead go up to the earth and eat the living. And then the dead will outnumber the living. This is from a 5,000-year-old story. And it's talking about what sounds to me like zombies. We also have the golem. Oh, where is he? Hang on. One moment, I'll just flick through these videos. Right, it's just getting there. The golem. This is a creature animated by mythical means, and this dates to Jewish mythology, which is very, very similar to the African one. It's the golem comes from Kabbalistic Jewish mythology, and this is very, very interesting because we also hear about this from Alexandra David Neal, who was an explorer. Alexandra, she was an explorer who went through Tibet in the ancient days of the mythical traditions. She explored the mythical Buddhist traditions of Tibet. And she talked about a tulpa, which is a creature that is conjured up by the mind. It's a physical object conjured up through contemplation and meditation in the mind. And she actually created her own little monk, she called it, which was her own tulpa. It was a little man. And she created it through contemplation, using this Buddhist law. And it's Alexandra David Neal. Very, very interesting lady to talk about. This is rather like the homunculus, this idea in Western occult mythology, this little man, this creature that can be created through magical means, and it can become a servant. This is just like the African mythology and tradition as well. And this has infected literature. And I mean, the earliest example is very, very interesting, because we talk about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is a very, very interesting science fiction story written in the early 19th century by an 18-year-old girl about a man who creates a homunculus. He does it through using bioelectricity. And this is very, very interesting, because Mary Shelley was inspired by someone called Luigi Galvani. That's it, Luigi Galvani, who was an Italian scientist and doctor who discovered how you by putting electricity through a body. He used dead bodies, he used dead animals. You can actually make them move as if they're alive, and this really freaked people out. Now, the cousin of Luigi Galvani was. And Galvani, it's interesting where we get the idea galvanised, people who are galvanised, that comes from Galvani. Now, Giovanni Aldini, if you've been Aldinised, Giovanni Aldini was the cousin of, or the nephew of Galvani, and he carried out an experiment in London where he did this to a human body. He did it publicly. In those days, scientists often performed in front of a fee-paying crowd in a theatre. He took a dead body from a man who'd just been hanged in prison, a convict who'd received the death penalty. He placed electrodes on the man's brain and on his spinal cord, and the man started moving as if alive. Now that is terrifying. You can imagine how terrifying that is. But one of the people in the audience during that experiment was Mary Shelley, and she witnessed this, and she went on to write Frankenstein. That's where she gets the idea from. So is it possible that the Illuminati can really turn dead bodies into zombies, either by magical and mystical means, or by heavy industrial and technological means? Or perhaps a combination of both, like in that book, Zombie Apocalypse by Stephen Jones et al. If so, why would they? Well, it's obvious they want... It's connected to transhumanism, which they're talking about, which connects into all the other things like Agenda 21, overpopulation, engineered disease, biowarfare. It all fits in together, and I think there's no certain answers to what I'm talking about today, but there is, I think there is a direction this is heading to, and I think given time we will get certain answers to this. And I think the Roxy Lopez interview, which has just come out, is an important update on what I myself have discovered. I think Jordan and Spencer have actually, they've almost discovered independently the same things that I've discovered. And we've gone down a different route, and they've discovered different things that I have, than I have. I've discovered different things that they have. But I'm gonna send them a copy of this film, and I'm gonna get in touch with them. Maybe we can work on this together. So Mr. Jordan and Dr. Spencer, if you're watching this, please, I want to help you out here. We can support each other. Now, what I've spoken about tonight, of course, is extremely disquieting, and I'm sorry if anyone watching this film has nightmares as a result of this, but something odd is going on, and there's no doubt it is going on, and I'm not sure what, and I'd love to be proved wrong, but it is going on, and we need to talk about it. And as I always say, it's what's worse, whether we know about it or it's going on and we don't know about it. If we don't know about it, it doesn't stop it going on. But I want to end on a positive note. There are forces for good as well as evil going on in this world, as Gandalf said in Lord of the Rings. Now, Sophia Smallstorm thinks that people who have Morgellons disease are actually, it's a good sign that more and more people are getting it, because Morgellons are only suffering from this, Morgellons disease sufferers, because their immune systems are rejecting the nano-life. Nano-life is everywhere, it's in most of us, if not all of us, and it's actually in us, and our immune systems are ignoring it. Now, people with Morgellons are actually, their immune systems are fighting back against this nano-life. So more and more people get Morgellons, according to Smallstorm. The Morgellons agenda, the nano-life, is failing to take hold in our biological biosphere of this planet. We are not helpless, and I want to end with a quote from Gandalf here. Gandalf, this lovely man from Lord of the Rings. Some believe it is only great power that can hold evil in check, but that is not what I have found. I found that it is the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay. Small acts of kindness and love. Gandalf. That's very, very true. We have the power within us to stop this. We're not helpless, and I think we're on the winning side, and I think we are going to be free of this. The very fact that I'm making this film and you're watching it is a sign. The whole idea behind this whole agenda is that nobody knows about it, nobody's talking about it. I think we should take hope from what Gandalf says. There are other forces at work in this world apart from that as evil. And I could talk for you for another 2 hours about why I think we free humans are in with a chance, but it's just too much to go into. But please, I don't want you to go home or switch off this video thinking that it's all over, because it's not. It's just beginning. We're going to be free of this. And as they say in Crime Watch, don't have nightmares. Thank you very much for watching this Panwo TV film, which is based on the lecture I did at Truth Choose Birmingham. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order.